Hi everyone, welcome to THD, and today we're talking about Shadows of the Galaxy spoilers part 8. So, for the very first one, last time I forgot to talk about Concord Dawn Interceptors, so we're talking about it today. This card is basically a 3/4 Sentinels for 3, which is very good. It's basically System Patrol Craft, but 1 resources cheaper. It has the advantage. It has a disadvantage of only having that +2 attack while defending. But honestly, for Sentinel unit, that's we are asking the main objective of that unit is going to be obviously to be on the defense. So I think this card is great. This is exactly the kind of card that a blue-white control deck would want, and I'm sure that a card like this will be extremely strong versus control. So the main inconvenience of that card is like it's really good against aggressive deck that have a lot of space in it, and I think in today's meta it would be an excellent card. But I'm afraid that it's very specialized and it's not going to be good against everything because of course there's going to be decks in which having a 1/4 Sentinels is really not going to be much very effective. So it's going to be really dependent on the meta whether this card is going to be a lot is going to see a lot of play or not. But having that options in blue white is I think is going to be very good. Obviously, it has strong combination with many different leaders. Really good with any Sentinels unit. Very good with Luke because you can give it shield. Also, really good with I forgot her name. Ray's because she can give additional +1/+1 very easily to that unit. So I'll give it a set out of 10. It's a very good card versus aggro. Um, Against all the deck, it's gonna depend, but I think it's a solid card. We got Rokai Gunship, so very underwhelming stats here to 1 for 2, but a pretty good when defeated effect. Deal 1 damage to unit or base, so that means, let's say you're training this card with an A-Wing, then as this unit dies, it can deal the last damage to kill that A-Wing, which is pretty nice. So the when defeated effect is very strong, but I don't think it makes up for the very underwhelming stats that the unit has for a pretty high price. So to me, I rate this a 4 out of 10. I don't think it's absolutely unplayable. I think there might be some decks that might want to have this kind of effect, but it's very unlikely to see constructed play. So next we got Dryden Valve. So far I've been really underwhelmed by deck capture mechanic. I think the capture cards are too situational, and once again capturing a unit in a game where units are pretty easy to take off the board is something that is relatively risky to do, and capturing cards is only going to be a temporary thing. Well, Dryden Vals can actually make the capturing permanent, and even better than this, it can actually allow you to play the unit under your control. So, if there's going to be some sort of capturing decks going on, Dryden Vals is most likely gonna be um, gonna be part of it because the card is extremely powerful. You got, of course, a 5/7 shielded for 7, so it's very tough unit to kill. Almost impossible to kill, actually. Very difficult to kill unless you get specific blue card that can remove them. And the ability to play under your control unit you've captured earlier is also very powerful. It gives an immediate impact on the game. But obviously, there's a strong condition here. You need to have a captured unit, and obviously that capture unit needs to be guarded by a unit you control. So there's some conditions that needs to happen here for this to be effective. Um, so even though he's a very powerful player for guard for capturing, is capturing going to be strong enough for Dryden to be a thing? That remains to be seen. So right now, I think the best combination we've seen is the card with Relentless Pursuit. I think it has 3 resources that can capture a unit, and if that unit is a bounty hunter, you give it a shield. I think this might be one of the best capture unit. Is very strong in combination with Boba Fett. Giving a shield to Boba Fett makes it very difficult to kill. And if you add up the armor, the bounty hunter armor, it makes it very difficult to kill. So maybe this is some sort of captured themed Boba Fett deck. Dryden could be extremely good in that very specific instance. So and also it can be blinked by a new adventure as well to repeat the effect later on in the game as well. So I give it a 7 out of 10. I think it's a very powerful card in the right shell, but it is quite situational and gonna rely you to build around this card to make it effective. So it's hard for me to rate it over the 7 out of 10. Moving on, we got Triple Dark Raid. This card is extremely interesting and I think has a lot of potential. It digs relatively deep, and being able to play a card with a so basically it offers a 2 resources discount because it costs 3 and gives a 5 resource discounts on the card that you play. So it's a little bit similar to Sneak Attack where you get a discount on the unit you're playing, but you also are getting the um, but you are only getting the unit for 1 turn, but that unit comes to play ready. The big difference, and I think that makes this card potentially a lot powerful than Sneak Attack, is the fact that it instead of playing a card from your hand, you're playing from 7 deep into your deck, which I think is better. It's gonna give you like a lot more options, assuming you play a deck that has a lot of vehicles. And the fact that it doesn't provoke card disadvantage is also quite nice. So it's a lot lower risk play, and not only that, you're also getting card back into your hand. So that makes in my opinion, it's different than Sneak Attack, right? Because Sneak Attack is cheaper, works on anything that only works on vehicles. So I feel like overall it's more situational in terms of like you're gonna need to really build around it to make it good. But in the right deck, I think it's potentially more powerful than Sneak Attack. The discount is very big, so 2 resources discount, and I think there's going to be a lot of vehicles that are going to work very well with this. With that being said, we don't really see that many vehicles that work really well. So I was thinking maybe of like playing something along the lines of like you can play like a Blizzard 8080, for example, for with a resource of 5. So you play this card at 6 to play Blizzard 8080 like 2 turns earlier, come into play, get a massive swing, wipe the opponent board. Um, like that kind of things. I still think this card we're gonna need to see a lot more vehicles for this card to be good. But as we're gonna see more and more vehicles, this card is only gonna get stronger. And I'm sure I'll be very surprised if there's not gonna be at some point some completely broken things you're gonna be able to play to do with that card. So I think so far the potential of the card is not amazing. There's not that many cards that combines very well with it. But I think the power of the card is only going to get much better as time goes by. So I'll give it a 7 out of 10 just because of the potential of the card. Next we got Kira as a leader. So I was very impressed by the leader ability. Basically, you pay 1 resource, you give 2 damage to your friendly unit, you give it a shield. So this is obviously meant to be used in combination with Grit. So far, Grit has been a keyword since the beginning of the game, but we haven't seen really many decks that really takes advantage of Grit. For example, I guess Krennic, you get a extra +1 attack when a unit is damaged. That's fine, but I don't think it's particularly strong with Grit. We've seen Guanaquistor as, yeah, you deal damage to your own unit, but then you can't use the attack bonus counter synergize with the Guanaquistor's ability. So it's like Grid has some build around card, but really Kira is really making this keyword worth a lot more. It's really the leaders that is meant for Grid more than any other leader in the game, and it makes the big 5/7 that gives Grid to all of the unit. It makes this card makes a lot more sense now that we are seeing Kira. So what I found very strong with her leader's ability is that for one, not only are you boosting your great units by damaging them, but you're also giving it a shield. And obviously, it doesn't really matter how much damage is there on your unit when that unit is shielded. So it's kind of like a very strong synergy with the grid. Once again, if you really build around it, and we've seen a lot of powerful grid unit. There's a lot of good grid units in the core set, and there's going to be some more in the new set. So for example, we got on turn 1 we got the 1/4 grid for 1. You can literally play that card, use Kira to boost that guy, and this guy is going to be like um, a 3/2 shielded. 3/2 shield, basically a 3/2 shielded for 2 is extremely powerful. So yeah, I'm a very big fan of the leader ability. Obviously, you have to build around it for this to be good. What made me a lot less excited, however, was the leader himself. She comes into play basically as a 4/4, and it deals damage to the enemy units. Um, well, basically it heals all unit and then deal half the damage, and also includes the opponent unit. Usually you're going to be wanting to deploy that leader when the opponent units are not damaged, so then you can basically just damage him, and then you also damage your own units. The problem is, so it's a very difficult to wrap your head around the leaders, but the when deploy of abilities seems to be very situational in situations where it would be good, and then getting a 4/4 body it doesn't seem to be particularly impressive for a 5 cost leader. So it's very fragile. It doesn't really deal so much damage. So I'm really underwhelmed by the leader unit. So very strong leader's ability, but very weak leader. Um, I'm sure that being able to deal half damage to opponent units will have its use in the correct circumstances, but also the fact that you have to defeat a bunch of your own shields when you deploy her. That's also kind of a bit of a bummer, and it kind of synergy with Krayt, because if you've played multiple units earlier that you on which you use your leader's ability on, those units are going to have damage and shield. So what's going to happen when she's going to go into play is like she's going to heal everybody, and then she's going to knock off all the shields, which means that you're going to lose your grid bonus and you're going to lose your shield as well. So there's some counter synergies between the leader ability and the leader when it deploys that makes this card a bit awkward. So yeah, long story short, very heavily synergy based leader, very strong leader ability, but very weak leader unit. So I rated a 5 out of 10. I think there's a lot of support for this card already in the game, and we're only going to get more. Is that going to be enough to make her playable? Time will tell. Once again, most of the leaders in this set, they don't strike me as being like a no-brainer competitive leaders. Um, I think yeah. So I'm still waiting to see what leader from this set can really show off and be a force to be reckoned with in the meta. There's gonna be some, I'm sure of it, but for sure I'm still don't know which one it's gonna be. Next we got Loam Pike. So this guy is pretty good. Very good stat for price of 4/6 for 4 is pretty decent by itself. Very similar um, to forgot our name. Yeah, Rose. Yeah, that's it, Rose. Where you get she can be basically a 4/6 for 4 if you want her to be. And this guy also can get a shield whenever it attacks. It gives a shield to an enemy unit, but also you can give a shield to a friendly unit by doing so. Um, the good thing is that there's a strong synergy with blue here, because usually blue doesn't care too much about enemy shields because it has removals that basically ignore shield. So the fact that you can give shield to an enemy unit and then you can kill those units with a takedown, power to the dark side, ignoring the shield, I think is pretty good, and give a shield to himself. And the last icing on the cake on this card is the smuggle ability. The fact that you can smuggle, and the smuggle cost is only 1 resources more than the price of the card, is also quite good. So I think it's a very well-rounded, solid card. I don't know if it's really a mid-range card. It's really a unit that shines in a mid-range deck. So it doesn't really play right into what black has been focused on so far, which is really much hard control. But there's been some blue black mid range decks, so always in those decks this card is gonna be quite good. So I rate this as 7 out of 10. I think it's a really solid card. Next we got Street Gang Recruiter, which is a colorless card. It's 4/4/5 that allows you to bring back an underworld card from discard pile to your hand. So it's an underworld card, can be a unit or also can be an event as long as it's underworld. And this card is pretty solid. Like 4/4/5 is not a great stat line, but it's not horrible. And the immediate impact on the game, getting back an underworld card. There's a lot of very strong underworld card in the game. Mostly thinking about Bounty Hunter Crew, like in the control matchup, being able to get back a Bounty Hunter Crew, and being playing the Bounty Hunter Crew, then get back an event. This kind of chain of event can be quite powerful in my opinion. And also the fact that it can get back your Fire Spray back into your hand. That's also very attractive. So I think this card is most likely going to be like a sideboard card for the Underworld deck to have a little bit more gas against control decks. So I think it has its use. I think it's a 6 out of 10. I read this as 6 out of 10. Moving on, we got Midnight Repairs. This card is going to be very situational because it's very rare that you would have so much damage to repair on some of the unit that you would want to use that card. Obviously, we're all thinking about stuff like Redemption, where you can play it, heal your base by 8, and then you pay 2 to heal your Redemption back to full. Is that really that amazing of a play. It's okay, I guess. But really, what kills this card to me is like the double blue requirement. The fact is, at the same time, it is situational, and at the same time, it has this double aspect requirement. Those two things combined really are going to hurt the card because being double blue already by itself makes you a little bit situational. If on top of this, you get a very situational effect, that's really like a death sentence. We all remember card like, for example, like Protector, which are Protector in a vacuum is quite of a kind of a strong card, and I think this card would see a lot of play if only it didn't have a double blue aspect requirement that basically combine a situational effect with a situational aspect requirement. Those two things combined can really hurt a card, and I think Midnight Repairs is one of those cards. It does have a very unique effect that no other cards in the game can do, and I'm sure there's going to be some important, some strong combination with that. But so far, I'm only rating this 3 out of 10, and honestly, I think it's a little bit generous. I think the reason why I give it a 3 is because it is very unique. There's no other card that can heal a unit so much, so I'm sure there's going to be some sort of synergies to build around it. I mean, obviously, there's a synergy with Kira that deal a bunch of damage. With that being said, Kira has um, really wants to be playing with grit, and I don't think you won't necessarily want to be healing all of your units whenever you have grit because you're losing all this precious attack bonus. I think ideally you would want to give shield to those units to make them survivable while keeping your attack bonus. Next we got Rival's Fall, which is the simplest card possible. It simply defeats a unit. So this is the only card that can unconditionally kill a leader, which I think by itself is very powerful. If we're in a meta where there's going to be a lot of expensive leaders or people are going to be playing a lot of upgrades on their leaders, that is going to be a card that's going to be very valuable in the meta where if that ever becomes a thing. So we are basically the opposite of Fall of the Dragon, where compared to Vanquish, where it's a little bit less situational than Vanquish, but once again you got to pay an extra for that extra for to make this extra playable. But I think here the extra cost to be able to defeat to be able to defeat a leader is, I think, well worth it. And I'm sure there's going to be plenty of situations where people are going to be playing to play Rivals Fall over Vanquish. So is it going to completely replace Vanquish? It's hard to say, but I think it's safe to say it's better than Vanquish. I rate this a 7 out of 10. It's still a very expensive card. Um, is it better than Vanquish? Is going to be remain to be seen. But I think there's a good chance that this card is going to be better than Vanquish. Is going to replace Vanquish in most builds. Um, yeah. Next we got the Marauder. The Marauder is an incredible card on paper. It's a 4/5 ambush in space for 5. Already a 4/5 ambush for 5 on the ground is already very strong. We all remember Bosk, which is also a heavy amount of play in Spark of Rebellion. But the fact that it has the same stat line and being a space unit is a big deal because space units normally have lower stats. With this 4/5 stat line, the Marauder is going to be able to kill most units in the game that comes before him, which I think is very, very strong. And not only that, it also has a when play effect that says when it choose a card in your discard pile, you can put this card as a resource if it shares the same name as a unit you control. And that effect is very, very powerful if you can hit it. So it's fairly situational, fairly difficult to hit with that effect, but if you do, the upside is massive. But the fact that the card is really playable even without the effect being triggered, I think it makes the card pretty good. Obviously, this card is extra good in Han because Han can very easily control which card on his resource pile is going to be discarded, and therefore can control and you can choose which card and you can choose a card that match a card that you got into play. It doesn't have to be a unique unit, by the way, so that's kind of cool. So that also makes the Marauder extra good. Han already plays a lot of unique unit, a lot of 3 ofs in the deck, so I think this card is going to be quite good in Han because it's going to be easier to trigger the effect and of course be able to ramp with Han is always very valuable. So Han Grain really like that card. Obviously, the other deck that would want that card is obviously the Hunter, which has been kind of around that dynamic of having card with the same name as card in your discard or whatever. Not sure how good Hunter is going to be. I already said that I was pretty pessimistic over that card. But the bad patch sort of archetypes, I don't know how this is going to pan out. But at the very least, this card is going to see a lot of play in Han, and I think it's a great card. So I rated this card an 8 out of 10. Next, we got a card shows Shoes Sides, and this ability allows you to basically swap the control of 2 units, but they have to be non-leader. So obviously, the card is fairly conditional because there means to be a leader unit on both sides of the battlefield, which is not always the case. It's also very expensive, comes in at 7, but the effect can be very powerful. And obviously, uh, ideally, you want to be trading a card that is very weak for a card that is very strong. So there's a lot of things that needs to go right for this card to be good. With that being said, I think this card has potential in the sideboard of a bounty deck. So you play those kind of very weak card that we've seen over and over again with bounty effects. And then you basically play this card against someone who would play a very large unit, and then you basically use this as a removal, and then you give the opponent a unit, um, and um, uh, and you take control of that unit. So it's a removal, and you also take control of that unit, which permanently, which is very strong. So it's very situational, but I think in the right situation it can be very effective. And now you can benefit from the bounty, and you get bonuses for triggering bounty because you're playing a bounty focus deck. So I think in those decks this card has a lot of potential. So 5 out of 10 because I think it's fairly situational, and it's most likely going to be a sideboard card. But I think in the right situation, this card is going to be super scary. Next we got Stolen Land Speeder. So a problematic that I've been thinking about for bounty deck, and I think one of the major weaknesses of bounty decks is that bounties really make sense whenever there's units on the opponent on the opposite side of the board. The problem is like there are certain decks that simply do not play any units. Therefore, you cannot give them bounty, and if you cannot give them bounty, you cannot trigger and you cannot do what your deck is supposed to do. So how do you solve that problem if you're playing against a hard control deck that almost doesn't play any units? How do you give this unit the opponent bounties, or how do you benefit from your bounty synergies? Well, the answer to that question is Stolen Land Speeder. Basically, because you are effectively giving your opponent a bounty unit whenever you're playing that card, which I think is super beneficial for a bounty deck. And then obviously, as you kill it, then you get a unit under your control as a 4/3 for 1, which is pretty nice. So I think in a vacuum the card is not amazing, but I think it's going to answer a particular need for bounty decks to have this this anti-control card that allows you to give your opponent bounty cards. And I hope we're going to see more cards like this that are going to allow bounty decks to be playable against deck that almost don't play any units. Yeah, so it's a great answer. It's very ingenious, by the way, in terms of game design. Probably one of my favorite design of card. And I'm rating this a 6 out of 10. It remains situational. Of course, you do not want to play this card against aggro, for example. But I think against the right decks, it's going to be a pretty valuable sideboard card at the very least for the bounty focus decks. Then we got Bravado, which allows you to unconditionally ready a unit, which is just incredible. We've seen ready effect in the game, but the fact that they are limited to unit that has 3 attack or less has been a huge limitations because obviously you want to ready ideally super strong Clinic like reinforcement walkers or cards that have an on attack effect that attack for a bunch. And the fact that you can do this now with Bravado is pretty strong, and it also has a cost reduction mechanic where if the if you defeated a unit, the card only costs 3, which is really icing on the cake. With that being said, of course, it is quite situational. You need to play this in a specific deck that really can benefit from it. And even if you do play this card, it's probably not going to be a 3 of, because at the end of the day, you still do need to have this powerful unit on your side to be able to make use of this. So this means I make this card a 7 out of 10. I think it's quite good. Maybe it's a 6 out of 10, but I think it's a card with a lot of potential. It's going to be very scary to play against. In some situation, you're gonna have to really think that keep in mind that this card exists because it can really take you by surprise. Next, we got the leader Cad Bane. So Cad Bane is obviously the leader that is meant for an underworld focus deck. So it's been very clear in the expansion that underworld synergy is gonna be a thing. And honestly, Cad Bane is, in my opinion, the best leaders we've seen so far in the set. So the ability to deal damage to enemy units, um, uh, uh, deal damage to enemy units for free without requiring an action nor requiring you to spend any resources, I think is excellent. Playing an underworld card is really not that difficult. If you're playing an underworld focus deck, you're going to be playing an underworld card every turn. And even if you don't get to choose where the damage goes, the fact dealing those damage on units is really going to be very effective, especially against units that have a lot of shields. Very useful to deal that damage on a unit. So I honestly think this card is very the ability is very good, and the leader unit is also not bad. basically 2/8 with rage 2 for 6, so almost sort of a 4/8 for 6. That's a pretty good stat line, and the ability now deals 2 damage instead of 1, which is also very good. Which so the ability get a significant upgrade, and the stat line of the leader is very good. So yeah, strong leader's ability. I think the main problem with Cad Bane and what we'll talk about is the fact that he has to compete with uh, Boba Fett collecting the bounty again. This leader is gatekeeping a lot of the yellow black leader, in my opinion. So will the underworld deck prefer to go on a leader that maybe is a little bit less powerful than Boba, but is more synergies with underworld, which is Cad Bane, or are they going to be prefer to be playing with the more globally powerful leader that is Boba Fett? It's going to be hard to tell, and it's going to depend on how powerful are those underworld synergies. And this one is very strong in my opinion. So I rate this a 6 out of 10. I would have rated this higher if it was not competing with with Boba Fett. But I think if you're going to be building an underworld deck, Cad Bane is a strong reason to do so, and his ability is very strong. Moving, we got covered strength. So this card heals a unit and give an experience to it. So you gotta understand that most of the time this card is simply just gonna give an experience token for 1 to a unit. Being able to heal the damage, especially on a unit, is fairly situational. So I think the card is not super strong. I rated this as 3 out of 10. It can smuggle. I think it's gonna be fine in drafts. I don't think it's gonna see much constructed play, but I could be wrong. Moving on, we got Rule with Respect, which is another legendary event. So it's a 4 resource that allows you to capture a bunch of units that attacked you, that deals damage to your base, attacks your base. And I think this card is underwhelming because obviously this card is meant to be like kind of an anti-aggro card. Your opponent attacks with your base with a bunch of units. You play this card and then you get rid of all those units. There's multiple problem with this. First of all, you have to spend 4 resources to make it happen. It's not a cheap card. The second problem is that you need to have a friendly unit in play for able to be able to use that, and then your opponent needs to have multiple units that actually attack your base. So there's a lot of condition happening, and generally speaking, whenever you are playing against aggro, you want to be playing a card that prevents your opponent from dealing damage to your base, not a card that get rid of the units after they dealt that damage, because after those units dealt that damage, they kind of did their job. They don't, generally speaking, aggro player does not expect you need to be able to attack a base multiple times. If they can attack the base once, it's already a good outcome for the aggro players. And not only that, those units are not um, um, removed for permanently. They are removed as long as the unit that actually captured them stays alive, which is not far from guaranteed. So the best I can expect from this card is to be a sideboard card versus aggro. But even then I'm not entirely sure that this card is going to be good enough. There's simply just too many problems with it, and it's fairly situational. I rated this card a 3 out of 10. It does have a pretty unique effect that no other card in the game has, and that's what basically allowed me to grant it 3 out of 10. Next, we got Bounty Antiquary, which is another bounty card. As you know, bounty cards are fairly difficult to rate because there's nothing in the game that resembles bounty, that resembles that. And here, this case, whenever you are managed to get the bounty, you get a 3-drop that is from the top 5 or top 10 of your deck. And there's a lot of strong 3-drops in the game, including in this set. So I think this card is honestly very strong. It's 1 resources, which is not the end of the world. It's not super expensive, and if you can trigger the effect, getting an extra unit out of it, I think is fairly powerful. It's a very powerful payoff. So I rate this a 7 out of 10. I think this card is pretty strong. It is bounty. It is situational. Probably going to be played only in some sort of bounty decks, but in those bounty, if you're playing a bounty deck that has green, you're probably going to be playing Bounty Antiquary because this seems to be a very strong payoff for what you're doing. Next we got Xanadu Blood. So this card is interesting. It is expensive. The when play ability is good, but situational. Bouncing your own underworld unit in order to exhaust enemy unit or resource is a situational effect. I mean, exhausted resources, I guess, can be good, but you don't know if exhausting that resource is actually going to be something that's going to set back your opponent. Sometimes it can, sometimes it cannot. It's hard to know without knowing what your opponent has in hand. But really having to bounce your own friendly underworld unit is a big cost. I'm assuming you're going to be playing a lot of cheap underworld units to be able to take advantage of Cad Bane's ability and also another card which we'll talk about later. So probably going to be playing a lot of cheap underworld unit for that purpose. But even then, I so I think the card is pretty decent in that context. And then you get a 4/6 Raider, which is almost a 6/6 that can actually kill a fire spray on attack, which is kind of neat. So I give it a 5 out of 10. I'm not. I think in a dedicated underworld deck, this card can have potential and might see play. But even if it does, I don't think it's going to be amazing. I think it's going to be all right. Which bring me to the other card I want to talk about is Lady Proxima, which every time you play an underworld card, you get to deal damage to your opponent unit, which is, in my opinion, going to be a strong reason to play underworld, because I mean she's cheap, she's hard to get rid of, and she pings basically damage over time without requiring an action. So something to understand is like, oh, if you want to deal damage to your opponent, might as well just bring a 1/4, right? So you can attack with that unit every turn. Well, first of all, a 1/4 for 1 is actually a pretty good rate. But the advantage that Lady Proxima has over a regular 1/4 for 1 would be that, first of all, our trigger can happen multiple times per turn if you play multiple Underworld cards, which is not impossible, especially if you play a lot of cheap units. You can have an immediate impact on the game. If you play Lady Proxima and then you play another Underworld unit right from turn 1, like for example a Greedo, you get to deal damage right away. And also, you get to deal damage over time without requiring an action. You don't actually need to spend an action to deal the damage, you just deal those cheap damage. Which is very awkward sometimes with those 1/4 units, right? Is that, yes, they can theoretically deal 1 damage per turn every time they attack, but you have to spend an action to do so. And do you really want to lose initiative just to deal 1 damage to the base? That's not always the case. So I think Lady Proxima is honestly a pretty strong payoff for an Underworld deck. So I rated this a 6 out of 10. I think it's going to be, if Underworld is going to be a thing, Lady Proxima is going to be part of it. That's, in my opinion, pretty obvious. And then we got Sinara Sand, so she had some pretty good, so Underworld threat, a 3/6 great for 4 is a strong sightline, but not amazing. The main problem I have with this card is obviously the downside. When she's exhausted, she has this bounty effect that deals 5 damage to the base. This is a very strong downside. So personally, I'm not thrilled about this card. I don't think, for example, I think if the card was like a 3/6 great for 4, I think it would be good, but I don't think it would be like amazing or anything. I think it would be alright. But the fact that it has this downside really doesn't really make much sense to me. If you compare this, for example, to Blaze Marble, Blaze Marble is a 2/5 for 4 grit, but Blaze Marbles has this amazing ability that allows you to get Sentinel whenever you have the initiative, which I think is very strong in the context of a 2/5 grit. And already Blaze Marble doesn't see much play, and that's despite being just a single blue, not even blue-black. So I think this card is not very exciting. I rate this 3 out of 10. It does have some powerful synergies with leaders we've already seen. Obviously, it works with Grand Inquisitor. It works with the I forgot the name. With oh my god, that was a while ago. Yeah, with Kira, of course. And so it has synergy with Kira, synergies with Grand Inquisitor, and it has Underworld keywords. So there's a lot of like positive things, but the card is pretty underwhelming. So give it a 3 out of 10. We'll see if they she end up. I think it's fairly unlikely that people are going to find a spot for a card that has such a strong downside. Then we got Darth Maul. Darth Maul, the Shadow Collective Visionary. So this is one of those 7-cost ambush unit that we've seen a lot of. We've seen a lot of those Jedi 7 like force unit with that cost 7 and have this amazing stats and immediate impact on the game. Unfortunately, he's in the same colors as Vader, which, as you know, is the best out of those 7-drop ambush. Vader is Commander of the First Legion, is the first one, is the best one. And I feel like Maul has but there I think some decks that might want to play Maul over Vader. First of all, I think it's unlikely that you want to play both. Such an expensive card. I don't think you really want to play both of them unless you're playing a very specific deck. And the main problem with is that I think Vader is more universally good because he's good against both aggro, midrange, and control, while Maul is a lot more you need to have an underworld unit to be able to use this ability. I think the ability is very strong if you do have an underworld unit. If you don't, then it's not so strong. And even if you do have an underworld unit, it needs to be an underworld unit that is cheap enough that you're happy to have it that die instead of your maul. Um, what really shine on this card is the combination of ambush and overwhelm with the 7 attack. This is very strong. It means it can one-shot enemy leaders, and it means that you can kill a unit and just deal a bunch of damage to the base. So if you're going to be playing a deck that is more focused on being aggro, having Maul is going to be a better option than Vader. In the context of an aggro deck where you have this option of just killing something dealing a bunch of damage to the base. If you're not playing a Vader deck, if you're not playing an aggro deck, which is most likely the case in a green black, I think Vader is going to be a stronger option overall. So I think it's a good card, but I think it's going to remain fairly niche. I rate this as an 8 out of 10. I think it's a little bit generous. I think it's closer to a 7 out of 10. It's also going to be a good budget option. I think if you are playing those color combination and you don't want to play, you cannot afford to play a Vader, and you want to have something budget to play instead, I think Maul is going to be a very good alternative. It is a very strong card. Unfortunately, it has to compete with Vader, which is a tough place to be. Then we basically have Cobb Vanth. So this is basically very similar, very strangely similar to a very iconic Earthstone card, which is called Piloted Shredder, which is basically a 4/3 that gives you a 2-drop when it dies, a random 2-drop. This card is a 3/2 for 3 instead, but whenever it defeated, instead of giving you just a completely random 2-drop, it gives you a 2-drop from the top 10 of your deck. So you actually have a lot of choices. You actually have a much better control over what kind of unit that can appear from him. And I think this card is incredible. I think it's amazing. Piloted Shredder has the reputation of being one of the most oppressive Hearthstone card, one of the most powerful Hearthstone card ever made. I think Cobb Vanth is likely to be very powerful in Star Wars Unlimited. I cannot imagine a world in which this card would not be an auto include in most green decks. I think it's just incredible. The 3/2 stat line is not great for a 3-drop, admittedly, but it's okay because it's going to put pressure on the opponent. 3 attack is still enough to kill most early game units, and whenever it dies, it's going to appear with another unit. That kind of stuff is strong against everything. It's strong against control because it's basically 2 units in one, essentially. It's good against aggro because it's going to be able to kill a Battlefield Marauder. It's going to be able to kill most of the early game units and then make another unit appear after that. And it's obviously stronger against mid-range because it's value and it can be aggressive. So it's also potentially a good combo card if you have a combo based on unit that costs 2 or less. It allows you to dig for the specific 2-cost unit. I think this card is incredible. It's also official, which has some synergies, and it is a single green aspect requirement, which means it's going to be able to be played in most green decks without problems. So there's just so much positive things going on with this card. I cannot imagine this not seeing play in most decks. It's just it's going to be an auto include in all green decks in my opinion. It is a 10 out of 10, and in my opinion, it is the best card we've seen so far. In Shadow of the Galaxy, this card is incredible. Moving on, we got Krayt Dragon. Krayt Dragon is this new super big late game legendary unit, and it is a very good one. So I saw this kind of a late game card. There's kind of like 2 categories of card. There's the stabilizers and now the finishers. So the stabilizers are like stuff like Devastator, for example, because it comes to play, kills a unit, and then it is Sentinels and block the space arena. It's really a stabilizer. It can also act as a finisher, of course, but then on the other hand, cards like Relentless are more like finishers. They come into play, and they're here to be difficult to deal with. And going to be finishing the game very quickly. And I think Krayt Dragon is clearly on that category of like excellent finishers. 10/10 stat line, of course, very difficult to kill for any deck that is not playing blue, pretty much. Very difficult to deal with. Has an immediate impact on the game because as soon as it's in play, it has this effect that when your opponent plays something, is going to have to you could be able to deal damage to a ground base, all ground units that they control. So that means that no matter what happens, Krayt Dragon will be able to generate value either by killing an opponent unit or dealing a bunch of damage to the base. And of course, the kind of card that you need to play in order to deal with something of that size is going to be fairly expensive. Therefore, you're going to have to take a bunch of damage. And if you don't deal with it, you're going to die very quickly because it's 10-10 overwhelm. The price is reasonable at coming out at 9 resources, and the fact that it has a single red aspect requirements means that you could be able to play this deck in a wide variety of decks. Especially most of the super late game finishers have mostly been in black, and the fact that now the arrows, the white aspect is going to have access to powerful late game threat like this is also something that's going to change the game a lot. Now it's going to be possible for those kind of like hero ram deck to have those powerful cards and those powerful finishes as well. Even though I still expect villainy to be playing card like this more often. So this card is absolutely incredible. An excellent finisher, difficult to deal with, and end the game. It's everything you could hope for kind of a late game finishers. And I rate this a 9 out of 10. So why not, am I not giving it a perfect score? Because obviously it is, at the end of the day, a very expensive card. And it's not going to be good in every situation. There's going to be... it is still a finisher at the end of the day. I think it's a card that is really good to play in an empty board. Like, I think they are like Avenger, um, Relentless. Those kind of cards are cards that are good when there's only like only one unit on the board. But if you are overwhelmed by a bunch of enemy units, then Krayt Dragon you're going to play it and you're going to die anyway. So it's not really a stabilizer, it's more of a finisher. So it is specialized, and obviously you need to be able to play a deck that can get to that point where you can get to 9 resources. So all those limitations prevents me from giving it a perfect score, but among the finishers that exist, this is the best one we've seen so far, and it is available for both heroism and villainy, which I think is a big deal as well. So an incredible card, and maybe gonna be, I think it's the best legendary card we've seen so far, if I'm not mistaken. It's just very, very strong. And that's it. That's it for today. That's all the cards. So obviously those I still haven't played much Shadow of the Galaxy. I played a few games with a few different decks, but I still have very little. I still haven't played with any of those cards. So obviously, all those are still authentic first impression on those cards. So obviously, take everything I say in this video with a grain of salt. And as usual, I will put my coaching schedule on the description below. And if you have any more impression or things that I've missed about those cards, feel free to comment on the comments below so we can discuss about it. And with all that being said, thank you for watching and see you next time.